welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and joining me in studio is none other than Mrs. Catie Sas. Welcome back, Catie.
Thank you so much.
Well, we are doing the post-sermon, or rather the sermon recap from this past Sunday, which we talked about Exodus 20, 1 through 11, and we talked about really the first tablet of the 10 Commandments, which for a lot of people, that just encompasses love God. And let's just do a quick recap of what those are. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery. So here it is. 1, you have no other gods before me. 2, you shall not make a graven image or carved image out of anything or bow down to serve them. 3, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. And 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, Catie, you were there for Sam's sermon, and Sam Teifke, who's our men's deacon, did an incredible job. Tell me what your favorite part about Sam's preaching was from this Sunday, if you can remember something.
So in general, if I could say how well he did in like one sentence, I think he had really great personal connection.
Yeah.
That led into the text really well.
Right.
And I loved the like imprint that I had about like how he was listening to his uncle and like the intensity.
Right.
And like how that's the level of intensity that the Israelites should have had with Moses, but that we should have with God.
Yeah. So that story was his uncle, who is Jack Wheeler, owned a paving construction company, and he used to work like a 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old on the hot streets paving.
Which is so
asphalt.
good for kids.
Yeah, that's so crazy. Anyway, and so he was acting up, and he gets sent to the principal's office, or Jack Wheeler, the owner of the company, and he just slams the table and kind of to get Sam's attention. And what Sam said is like that sort of like the grabbing his attention to sort of like, I'm laying down the law for you. Is exactly sort of how God causes Mount Sinai to tremble, smoke, fire, all the things, and then terrifies all the people. And then he says, here is the 10 commandments that he's going to give to Moses.
I feel like in Exodus, so many times you hear God say, so that they may know that I am God.
Yeah.
Like after anything he does, the whole point is that so they might know that I am God.
Or he'll say, I am the Lord. And it's just an interesting thing of his declaration of who he is. All right. So these 10, the first 4 commandments, and I don't know if, let's just kind of go one by one. You shall have no other gods before me, which seems pretty simple. Any thoughts on you shall have no other gods before me? I mean, that's...
I mean, is the second one mostly about idolatry, or is this the one?
Well, they're all about idolatry.
Yeah.
The first one is like you should have like no other god before me, so don't be idolater. Second one is like don't create an image of God or anything that you might worship. So idolatry, and then the next one is about taking the name of God lightly or swearing by God and then not doing the thing. That would be those first 3. The second one I thought was interesting. You shall not bow down to them, anything you've created, or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who reject me, and showing covenant faithfulness to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, sometimes people have a problem with this, and it's because they don't like God being jealous. When you hear about God being jealous, how does that affect you?
I'm not gonna lie, it is hard for me to process, like to remove my perception of jealousy in a worldly, human, fleshy way.
Yep.
And try to apply what true godly jealousy.
Yeah.
means.
So the Bible, and I think I'm so glad you put it that, because I think this is the question that
because it is really hard to comprehend.
Let me help you. And
because he's not like a jealous boyfriend,
right? But he is like a jealous husband. So watch this.
Okay.
So you want Ryan to be jealous of you.
Okay. Yeah.
Like if you were flirting with some dude, you want Ryan to go, hey,
can you
not do that? In fact, if he didn't do that, you would kind of be offended that he didn't care.
Like he's kind of like passive.
Yeah, passive, right?
Yeah.
So you want a husband to be jealous.
Right.
Okay. So jealous is positive. That means
but also jealous of the right things, of
jealous
correct
of the right
things.
right?
Yeah.
And so with God, He's always jealous of the right things. But if the opposite or the same vein of jealousy, but the negative piece on that is envy. So jealousy is you're trying to take something from me that is rightfully mine. All right. Envy is
Okay.
I want something that I haven't been given. So I'm envious because you've got really great shoes and I want those shoes.
Okay.
I'm jealous that you want to steal my shoes.
Oh.
Do you see sort of the difference there?
Oh, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So that's how. So God. So if and I've actually sort of like in my head, I always was like, it's not right for me to like get upset if Adrian were to talk to some other guy and some sort. And then all of a sudden, as I've been reading this, like, no, that's appropriate for me to have jealousy for the affections of my wife. I should be jealous for those things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of those things I had to learn, which I know it seems weird to learn jealousy because I think I had it trained out of me for so long because I didn't want to be seen as like the jealous boyfriend.
Like controlling.
Yeah. Right? I think we've sort of put the opposite of, so controlling is passive. And so I'm not going to be controlling, so I'm going to be passive. And that's not it. I need to be controlling in a sense that I'm going to lead my wife to have love and affection for me. But if I like, you will love me, that never works anywhere, right? So I need to love her with affection, love her, so then she will respect me out of the influence I've had in her life, not because I'm your husband, dang it, and you better respect my authority. Like
Right.
that's where I think we sometimes go,
Right.
and that's not effective way to lead our wives.
Right.
So anyway, so I think that helps us is that God is leading us, and He's always wooing us to Himself. And when He has to, He uses discipline for us to bring us back to Himself. And then it gets weird. Does that mean that husbands are to use discipline with their wives? No, but you are called to lovingly correct your wife.
It's kind of like, so Brian, whenever there was a time where like I went in for a hug there was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
It was a dude.
Right.
And I didn't mean to like do the double arm, like
Yeah.
full hug,
Right.
but it just kind of happened. And Ryan was kind of like, that was kind of
Weird.
Yeah. He was like, why didn't you just like side hug?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. Yeah, it just happened. And he's like, okay, well, can maybe like side hugs from now on.
Right.
So,
And
like,
I had
it was
to learn.
just this like weird.
And Adrian would do that for me because I was sort of the same way.
Yeah.
And sometimes, there are some ladies that kind of just full on and you're just like,
Yeah.
And I think she understands it's not my desire,
Yeah.
but that sometimes
Yeah.
happens. But she had to correct me early on to not give away affection that was meant only for her.
Right.
Because I think there was a weakness of mine that I didn't fully wrap my head around. And she was really good at helping me understand there's a difference between being amicable and being almost too far.
Right.
And I was really grateful for that. And what I appreciate is that she loves me enough that she wants my affections.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's a healthy thing. So back to this, God in the same way wants our affections. He doesn't want us straying towards other gods. And during that day, the reason why it's all the same other gods. So you would go to other gods because you wanted to have your farming blessed. I want fertility for my crop, so I'm going to go bless the whatever fertility god. And I might even go have sex at the fertility temple because, listen, I'm going to do what I need to do. And I'm sure Yahweh's not too thrilled about that, but I need my crops to grow. So I got to hedge my bets. I got to put a little money in everywhere because I got to diversify my portfolio when it comes to the gods. And God's saying, no, I want it all. And I think it's the same way with us now. Do not hedge your bets by saying, listen, I'm going to work really, really hard, put overtime, sacrifice the things of God, like taking care of my family, so that, and you might put in the guise of, I'm taking care of my family. What you're really doing is you're being greedy, or you're kind of creating something, a false God, a protection of security that is in money and not in God. Mm-hmm. So you are always sort of faced with that, and that was what the struggle was. It manifested in the worship of other gods, that you would bow down to, and it was more obvious. And now, since the age of reason, we don't bow down to other gods, but we do bow down to the other gods of success, materialism, etc. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
The thing that go ahead.
No.
Okay, so the other part about this was interesting. It says that I'm a jealous God responding to the transgressions of fathers by dealing with the children to the third and fourth generations who reject me. Now, this is where a lot of people get sort of frustrated with this because they'd say, like, how's that even fair? Like, how can, like, the kids suffer for their parents' sin?
I thought that there was like a command that said children are not to be punished for their father's sin.
That comes later. But here, it says that I'm a God who deals with the third and fourth generation. Now watch, of those who reject me. Okay, here's what's super hard about this, but this goes back to the same sort of reality of Pharaoh. Did Pharaoh... I think when we look at God, we're like, all human beings are basically innocent, and they either choose God, I'm on the God team, or they from their place of innocence, they choose the evil team. And so we're kind of putting everyone in everyone's generally good category. But we know that even in this time, that nobody's good.
Right.
And so everybody rejects God.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't accept God apart from God giving you a spirit of faith, giving you the gift of faith to receive him. And that is also in the Old Testament. So how do I know this? Well, I want to contrast Pharaoh with Rahab. You remember Rahab?
Yes.
She's the lady at Jericho who's the prostitute who then says, hey, everyone's afraid of you, and we're all going to die. And she meets the spies, and she hides the spies, and then she ends up being in the line of David, which ends up being the line of Jesus, right? Rahab.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference between Rahab and Pharaoh? They both, in a sense, knew that there was a God out there. It's just that Rahab was given the gift of faith to take action and receive help and aid the spies. I think she couldn't do that apart from the Spirit of God working in her.
Right.
And so when you talk about, I deal with the children to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, well, they already are rejecting him. And so fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's where anytime we look at it's called
and we don't know how God will deal with them.
We don't know.
Yeah.
But he does for those who, in showing covenant faithfulness to 1,000 generations of those who love me. Well, how does that work? Well, the ones who love him are the ones he chooses he will love. Like, he gives them the gift of faith, and then they respond to him. So I think so when I read that passage, I don't get like offended by it, like God's unfair. Because I think sometimes we don't like it that God's particular. Meaning he chooses some and he doesn't choose others.
Right.
Like he chooses,
right.
And this is where people go like, yeah, an Armenian camp would say, Armenians just believe that you choose God, God doesn't choose you. And you go, well, did God choose the Jewish people? Well, yeah. Well, what's the difference? He chose the Jewish people. How could he not choose? Okay.
He chose a people for himself.
Right. There we go. All right. Taking the Lord's name in vain. Let's kind of move on to that one. How have you heard that from your perspective just in growing up?
When I was younger, I was always told, don't say, oh my God.
Right.
But I also don't fully understand.
That's good. So it is that. It's taking lightly the name of God, like using it as a curse word. That's bad.
Like, don't say the Lord's name in vain. Like,
have meaning every time you say God's name.
Okay.
Like, you're allowed to say God damn it if you're actually thinking that God should be damning something. Like, God condemns
Oh, but not
sin.
just like, you stumped your toe.
Yeah,
and,
don't say, God damn it, I stubbed my toe. That's the wrong usage. That's a light usage of God's name and therefore sin. And what I think it's really saying is, when Jesus says, don't swear by heaven, for that's his home, or that's his throne, and don't swear by earth, for that's his footstool. He's using this, like, don't take the Lord's name in vain, because what would happen is people would do all sorts of swearing by all sorts of God stuff because they wanted people to really, really believe them. He's saying, let your yes be yes and your no be no, because you're so in the presence of God, because you are not from this kingdom but of God's kingdom. And I think that's where Jesus was saying when he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But he wasn't saying, don't ever swear ever. Like, I think it's okay to, I swear by an authority higher than me that I'm going to tell the truth. I swear by God in a courtroom or whatever. That's an okay thing to do, because you're saying I'm swearing by the Lord that what I say is true. And I'm swearing by a higher authority than me. And I think that's where people struggle. Is like, well, didn't Jesus say never to swear ever? Well, you're not taking the Lord's name in vain if you're truly acting in the presence of God. But you should be so in the presence of God that your yes is yes and your no is no. There's no reason to say this is really true, because your word is so true all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then the last one, the Sabbath day. This gets tricky. Let's talk about what do you know about this? Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart as holy. For 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work.
So for the longest time, I thought Sabbath day was on Sunday, and it's actually not. It's on Saturday.
Right.
And I think, like, growing up in a small town, some businesses were closed on Sundays.
Right.
And I just, like, and Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday. Like,
Right.
It's just one of those things. But I'd never really known how to celebrate Sabbath. I think over the last, like, year or so, I've learned that, like, there are Christians that on Saturdays, they do nothing but they rest at home. They, maybe the mom, like, bakes and cooks, or but they don't, like, have plans on Saturday. I don't think too much into it.
So it was supposed to be a sign to the rest of the world that they were of God, and God gave them 6 days to work and 1 day to rest. Whereas I'm sure from their days of slavery that it was work every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're doing here is they're saying, God gave us this, and while the rest of the world is working, we don't. While the rest of the world is striving, we're not.
So what is it about Sundays then? Is it just because church is on Sunday? Like,
so
I don't.
They in the early church, all the early church worshipped Christ. They would get what the oldest historical records of the early church was that on Sunday they would gather early in the morning at dawn, because that's what time Mary discovered the tomb, and sang hymns to Christ as to a God. And that's all that it really says about those early days. And I think it was because there was something distinct about them, that their hope wasn't in the Jewish law, which was taught on Saturday. Their hope was in the resurrection, which happened on Sunday. Okay, so this is where in Romans 14 and Colossians 2:16, don't get wrapped up in the Sabbath day. But for some people who are Jewish, historically, they're like, I can't separate my faith from a Sabbath day. And what he says, like, don't judge those. That person then becomes the weaker brother. You understand what I'm talking about? Like, don't judge the weaker brother who sort of, like, if you wreck his Sabbath day, he's not able to fully worship because that is so entwined into
let
his
him
worship.
in that way.
Let him. It's
Well,
not that big of a deal.
It's like my friend Agatha and Ken.
Yeah.
They celebrate, or
Your Jewish friends.
Not like celebrate, but they acknowledge Sabbath. They start Friday night and then go until Saturday morning. And
so it's Friday evening to Saturday evening is technically what the Sabbath day is, which is sort of wild, right? So, yeah. So what happens and that's where in the Judeo-Christian world, the reason why we end up with from Saturday off, Sunday off, which is wild to think about in comparison to the rest of the world, is because they wanted to make sure that they had both those days off so that they didn't screw up at either, let's just
I mean,
cover
is
our
it really
bases.
that big of a deal?
So Jesus, I would say, is our Sabbath day rest. And so what Colossians 2 is like, don't let anyone judge you based upon how you value, if you value every day as holy, or if you value one day as more holy than another. So
like, it's not really like something to argue about.
No.
Right.
No, but if somebody is really like dead set on the Sabbath day, then let them go for it.
It doesn't faze you.
Right.
At
And
all.
I think for what happens, I think what in our culture we've gotten away so far from a Sabbath that I think actually bringing it back would be a wise thing.
Yeah.
And so what Adrian and I do is essentially we shut down Thursday night to Friday night, and we kind of make that the Sabbath. And I think what that usually meant is that there's no work. So we're not
for
gonna,
you and her, because the kids still got to go to school.
They go to They go to school, but Saturday is a work day because there's usually some church event that's going to fall on a Saturday. There's always
so Friday you're off work. Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know that.
And so like if people want to call me and like want to, not that makes them not my friend, but I won't answer it usually.
But like Friday, that's like your Sabbath.
I'm just gonna chill and spend time with God,
You've
spend
got to
time with
rest.
the family, and gonna rest and spend time with Adrian and really enjoy the time. Spend time with my mom, and I think that becomes super important But it also shows a degree of faithfulness that you're trusting the Lord with everything.
Right. You're not like, my job is going to fall apart if I am off on Fridays.
Right. But to be fair, early on in the church, like we used to take Monday off, and it was so hard not to do stuff on Monday because I was always terrified the church would just fall apart.
Oh, okay.
Like when
so you've had to grow in that.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like Adrian would tell you, I'd be like wrecked by what the numbers were from Sunday to Sunday, or like ecstatic based on what the number was on any given Sunday. So much so that I can pretty much predict how many people are going to be at church on any given Sunday. Doesn't matter which Sunday it is, I can tell you what it is. Because I know the history so well, and I have to really overcome that sort of like,
oh wow,
putting my own personal value in numbers.
Yeah.
And I think what happens when I do that, then Adrian feels like, oh, I'm not a very good wife if I am not helping achieve the numbers or whatever, because he gets down. So therefore
So I need to help him.
Yeah, so that becomes problematic. So I've grown a ton in that, but it's still something I have to sort of like overcome. It's not like you don't want to know how many people you have, because numbers.
But you don't want to
names,
make that your obsession.
But you don't want to make it your obsession.
Yeah,
But that's
no,
how that
I get
can become
it.
idolatrous. If anything that isn't the Lord is your focus, then that's an idol in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things I've said in the past is, if whatever you think about when you're not thinking about anything is really where your mind drifts toward, that's the thing that you can kind of that can be an idol in your life.
Yeah.
And so for me, that back in the day, it used to be like the numbers, oh no. And I would just, strive as opposed to rest in the Lord. And so now I feel like in my quiet times with the Lord, I'm not thinking about like the numbers. I'm not thinking about, oh man, I was offensive, or that thing that I said at that party was not, no, that wasn't good. I'll have to repent of that or whatever. You know what I mean? Because like, I didn't want to. I came off like a jerk, and I didn't even mean that. I was trying to be funny, and it wasn't funny. You know how that goes.
Yeah. Yep. I know. I get it.
And so I think that's how you kind of grow in that. But to the whole point of like, I do think a Sabbath rest is so valuable, and I think what happens with the busyness of our schedules, and with us with 4 kids, every day is busy.
Yeah.
So tell me about with one, do you still feel that same weight of busyness?
I don't know that it's busy.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've always leaned towards not busy.
Yeah.
Like I don't find any joy in being busy,
right.
or I don't feel any worth in being busy. Like that's not the camp I fall into.
Yeah.
And so
I'm definitely of that camp.
I choose the non-busy.
How do you talk to me about like the non-busy camp? Like what goes on through your mind? Is it like I'm just present wherever I am, or
And if something is causing our weeks to feel busy, or if something is like causing our life at that time to feel busy, that is like, because there's a busy in ministry. I think like sometimes when you're in ministry, that's just the season,
right?
Like it's just boom, boom, boom. Like, but I do think it's okay to say, you know what, I'm gonna rest, and I'm gonna clear this schedule, because it's taking away from family. If it's taking away from motherhood, if it's taking away from marriage, and if it's taking away from like me feeling like a daughter instead of a doer,
wow,
then I'm like, no, I don't.
Somebody
I don't
better write that
it.
down. If you're not feeling like a daughter and you're feeling like a doer, then something's wrong. That's awesome.
I hit a point in my life where I'm like, I don't need to be busy and be in all the things and go to all the things and meet with all the people to feel like I'm doing anything for God. Yeah. That's not where my worth is. And so I've found so much joy in a slower, more intentional life than in like attending all the things or serving in all the ways. And I've had to really because there was a time recently where I was like, well, if I step away from this ministry, then, what am I going to fill it with? Like I was talking to Ryan, and I was like, what if I kind of stop doing this, then like, I need to do something. I need to do another thing. Yeah. And he's like, no, you don't need to, like, you're already serving. Yeah. He's like, you don't
be a daughter, not a doer. Gosh.
Like, you don't need to find another thing to do. Yeah. because you have plenty. Like, you can be intentional in investing in where you are in the things that God has you in, and you don't have to think of more to do.
It's great. Wow. We can all go home on that one. That's awesome. I love that. I think that resonates with me. Be a daughter, not a doer. That's awesome. I think if there's anyone here listening, like, you need to share that, like, put that on your Instagram. Be a daughter, not a doer.
I didn't mean
Catie
for that
Sas.
to, like, sound as good as it did.
No,
but
it's really
like,
good. But that's
oh, it
rest.
does
Like,
sound-
as a son of God,
Yeah.
a son of the Father, there isn't striving. It's just like he commands the earth, the world, all the things to happen, and I can just rest in that. And that's really what the Sabbath day was, to remind the people of God. It was a sign to the rest of the world. We don't strive like you guys do. We are different. And you don't want to put a smugness on this. Like, nah, you guys stink. But the reality was they didn't have to work like the rest of the world worked. And now, in this day and age, we rest in Jesus. We don't have to work like the rest of the world works, where my value is in what I achieve and not who I am.
Yeah.
Awesome. Way to go.
Well, I mean, it was really the only reason that came to mind was because it was really hard when we transitioned from, we were deacons, we were community group shepherds, we were serving in like multiple areas, we were attending all the things. And granted, this was before Ava, so we were both, we didn't have kids.
Yeah.
But whenever I stepped out of those roles, I felt like my identity was crushed. Like, I had no idea who I was. I had no idea if I was even worth anything to the church. And that's when I started to finally question, where is my heart in like, where's my heart in serving? Where is my heart in like being in having these titles or these roles? And so like that whole next year, which happened to be 2020. So, plenty of time to sit and think about your life. That's kind of when I realized, like, I don't need all of that.
Yeah,
like
that's huge.
not
Your identity is in Jesus.
Yes.
And then you serve,
And being a
clearly you
daughter.
serve the church by living on mission in your home. You bless the people where you live, work, and play. You serve children's ministry.
Yeah.
And you are in a community group.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful, like, you're in community, you're serving, you're living on mission. And I think sometimes people don't recognize that is the call of the Lord. And so I think they can not busy themselves by filling their time up with something else, like a million shows or something, as opposed to, I'm going to be intentional with my time, which sounds like you've really jumped into an intentionality there.
What are your priorities? What are the priorities that God has put in your life right now?
That's great. Hey, listen, thanks so much for watching. We would if you got any questions, make sure you text us at 737-231-0605, and we would love to hear from you. And on anything about faith, culture, everything in between, we love your questions. We would love to give you answers. So from our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.